Thank you, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. It's incredibly nice to be here. Exactly 1 week ago, to the minute, I was giving another keynote address at another museum conference, and that was the Association of... I don't know what they're called now. Something to do with enterprise. Basically, in the nicest sense of the word, they call themselves the other race. They're the people that do shops and commercial stuff in museums. It was great. It was in Birmingham. There was lots of stores, and there was lots of very incredibly enthusiastic people there talking about how you make more money from museums. And I say that firstly to reassure you that I'm not going to give the same speech as I gave them. I gave them an incredibly different speech, but it's to make the point about just how diverse the museum sector is. And that from where I am, and where my colleagues in ACE are, we have to straddle, embrace the entire museum sector, the entire country, all of England, all of its 50 million people, all of its rich people, all of its poor people, all of its diverse people. And we are interested in squeezing, the maximum out of that museum ecology in all of its forms to have the maximum benefit for as many of those people as possible. So I just say that so that when I talk to you this afternoon, that's kind of where I'm coming from, and what I'm particularly interested from, in a quite selfish way, if you like, isn't necessarily how well are you doing as university museums, but what I'm really interested, and by the way, you're doing incredibly well, but what I'm interested is, that contribution you can make to that incredibly rich ecosystem or, whatever, ecology that is the museums, and how you can complement other parts of it, and that's something I want to come back to. What I would like to do for the next half hour or so is, firstly, if you bear with me, I would like to just rehearse through what we have done with museums at Arts Council, the journey we're on, so any of you who aren't familiar with that do understand where we are, what we're doing. Put that in the context of our strategic vision, our artistic, cultural strategic vision. And that's useful because then I can talk very specifically about where I do see the particular value that university museums bring to that ecology. So we are now 18 months into having museums and museum functions at Arts Council, although the process itself started about 36 months ago. So it's still a relatively new thing. We have a team of 9 museum relationship managers, 2 of them, Hannah and Michael, for the South East and East, are here with us today, working alongside arts colleagues across the country. We have a national lead for museums, for the moment myself, and a central team, a national team. And we have a team of cultural and collections property staff based in London, and through them we continue to successfully run the cultural property functions that were at MLA, and people often forget were functions of MLA, are functions of Arts Council. The government indemnity scheme that is still incredibly valuable to all of us, the acceptance in lieu scheme, which is about to be joined by the lifetime giving cultural gift scheme. We manage both of those. And we manage export controls as well. We've relaunched and are running accreditation very successfully and hopefully seamlessly, and we continue to run designation, which, as Nick said, is incredibly important to museum collections, and we continue to be able to support designated collections through Renaissance money, which I'll come back to. We've taken on the DCMS funding for Tyne and Wear museums, which obviously has a university element, and we're currently running a programme on behalf of the Department of Education, which is building capacity for schools engagement in 10 regional museums partnered with 10 national museums. After a very successful Cultural Olympiad and 2012 Games, for which our element was the Stories of the World programme. Again, many museums were involved in that. We're looking to build a legacy, that great 2012 World legacy of the huge success of 2012, and in particular at the moment are thinking about and planning for an appropriate way to use some of those lessons in commemorating the 100th anniversary of World War I. So we've gone, I hope to think we've done an awful lot in those 18 months, and hopefully for many of you, you haven't spotted, you know, an awful jarring disconnect between MLA and Arts Council. What we're also working to do is to integrate wherever possible and relevant our wider arts funding and development with museums. We want to integrate, we want to make the most of it. And we are beginning to do that. However, a practical obstacle to this is the use of lottery money. Arts Council is used to using arts lottery money. It is the distributor of arts lottery money strategically across all of its programmes. And this arts lottery money is not available for non-arts activity in museums. As we all know, museums go to the Heritage Lottery Fund for museums. So we have this rather odd thing that we are the National Development Agency for museums, but HLF are the lottery deliverer. So what we are in the process of doing is having as many conversations as possible to again, integrate thinking between ourselves and the Heritage Lottery Fund, and those talks are going very well. We are, of course, as you may or may not be aware, also in the middle of our own major reorganisation and restructure as a result of the very major cuts imposed on Arts Council at the last comprehensive spending review. We will emerge from that reorganisation in July with about 20% less staff, about 120 less staff, but hopefully in terms of our outward face for museums, not a lot different, I hope. Moving on to Renaissance, most obviously importantly for the English regional museum sector, we have now completely relaunched the Renaissance programme in its new format, following the independent review that Sarah Selwood undertook in 2009. In early 2012, we launched the major partner museums to replace the old hubs and hub partnerships. We have 16 what we call major partner museums that receive between £500,000 and £2 million a year. That totals £21 million a year. And this supports a group of large regional museums with the potential, or museums that are already delivering excellence, but we believed when we named them that they had the potential to be beacons of excellence for English regional museums and be museums that could aspire to sit alongside the national museums in this country. And of course they include the Oxford University Museums, the Cambridge University Museums, Manchester University Museums, and Newcastle University through its involvement in TWAM. And you know, the point was made, I'm not sure it was made in one of the speeches or in the conversations, that you know, when you walk around this museum, and indeed when you walk around a lot of the university museums at Manchester, Cambridge and Oxford, you might say, well, they're already comfortably sitting alongside the best national museums in terms of what they deliver, and I certainly believe that. At the end of March, we will announce the second round of the Renaissance Strategic Funds. We've created a pot of £15 million per year that English regional museums can bid into for projects that contribute to our goals. We had this pot in 2012-2013. We used about half of it to help the old hub museums transition out of Renaissance, and about half of it for commission funds. But that pot of strategic funds also ought to be a major source of support to university museums, those museums that fall outside the major partner museums. We're also funding a programme of national museum development support for smaller museums. We've put £3 million a year into this, and this has provided a network of 9 providers across the country, in most cases run out of major partner museums. And then finally, we're running a suite of national sector-wide programmes and projects totalling about £3.5 million a year. And this includes accreditation, which I mentioned, designation, the V&A Purchase Grant Fund, which is still prospering, the PRISM Fund for scientific collections, subject specialist networks, which I know a lot of you are involved in. It supports the Collections Trust, Nick is here, and Culture 24, and also the campaigns Museums at Night and Kids in Museums. Overall, we hope that this model means that more museums will benefit from the programme, and money can be used more flexibly and strategically. In return, it is the case that a number of museums that had become very reliant on Renaissance funds under the old hub model have seen this regular funding end. However, overall, the original aim of the Renaissance programme still stands, to use central government money to develop English regional museums with the potential to bring benefit to people across the country. The spread of funding programmes means that we can provide infrastructure support to the whole sector. We can provide beacons of excellence through the MPMs, but also provide support for all museums that have a desire to achieve excellence and strong, resilient business models. We cannot and would not want to support every museum in England. Equally, we must not use Renaissance to fill gaps left by other funders. It must be used in partnership with those other funders to move us on. And in the particular circumstances we find, particularly in local authority, we're more and more having to look very hard at that. But for now, I think we can hold to those ideals. Renaissance also provides a powerful tool as part of the Arts Council's wider conversation with funders and stakeholders, again, particularly local authorities. It is a very powerful thing to go into a place and talk to local authorities if you are bringing money with you, as I'm sure you would expect. So moving on, our funding through Renaissance is underpinned strategically by Arts Council's 10-year plan, which hopefully you're aware with, our little red book, Achieving Great Art for Everyone. If you're not familiar with it, get it off the website. It is the kind of DNA of how we think. Achieving Great Art for Everyone was completed shortly before the transfer of museums and library functions was announced. So rather than rewriting the document, Arts Council has prepared a companion document to cover museums and libraries called Culture, Knowledge and Understanding, Great Museums and Libraries for Everyone. And both documents have at their heart 5 goals, 5 strategic goals of what we want to achieve for the arts, what we want to achieve for museums. Goal 1 is that excellence is thriving and celebrated in museums. So it's about excellence. Goal 2 is about more people experiencing and being inspired by museums and libraries. So it's about audiences and making those audiences as large as possible. Goal 3 is about museums and libraries being sustainable, resilient and innovative. So it's about business models and business strength. Goal 4 is about leadership and workforce and diversity, making sure we have the best leaders and that we have a skilled workforce and that it is diverse. And goal 5 is about children and young people, making sure that they are having the maximum benefit from museums. Now those 5 goals can, I think, be sort of distilled down even further, really into 2 prime aims. And the first is that we want to see excellent services, excellent museums, excellent museum products, reaching as many people as possible, including children and young people, and that's basically goal 1, 2 and 5. And the second thing we want is that we want those services to be supported by strong, resilient, well-led services. That's goal 3 and 4. And I'd start, before going on to talk about the sector and about museums, that from where I see it, and it's been echoed last night and today, the university museum sector is in a good place in terms of that second area, the leadership and the resilience. You have, compared with other parts of the sector, you have very good leaders and very good staff. We might have a conversation about diversity, but that's probably for another time. But you are well led, and relatively speaking, compared with local authorities right now, you have strong business models and you are resilient. So I am less worried about that in terms of the university museum sector, which is a luxury because then we can concentrate on the other thing, which is about excellence and audiences. And I'll come back to that. Let me then, I'm not timing myself, I think we're okay. If I now talk a little bit about the sector in general, and then where universities might sit in that, you know, we all know, and it's been talked about a little bit, we've had 15 or so very, very good years in the museum sector. And having Chris Smith here last night, you know, he was the marker for the beginning, if you like, of that period. However, right now, things are looking very differently, and the museum sector, and as with all public sectors, are now facing incredibly challenging times. Local authorities in particular and local authorities support just under 50% of all museums in this country, are facing unprecedented funding challenges. They are having to completely rethink how they do things. And fundamentally, I think we need to be very clear, there is vastly less money, and it's no longer a case of just making cuts and waiting for the good times to come back. We need to do things completely differently. And that's why, as we have conversations with local authority museums, more and more we're talking about new governance models and new business models. And many local authority museums are moving, or considering moving, to trust status or different business models. That said, it is also the case that new museums continue to be built, new galleries are being built, the Heritage Lottery Fund still has plenty of money, we still have a reasonable amount of money, so it is a very mixed picture. And as I go around the country, you realise that you will go to one local authority and they won't be making any cuts at all, and they will be putting a huge amount of effort into culture, and you'll go somewhere else and they're not interested at all, they're only worried about their statutory services. And in many, many cases you realise that the common, or the defining factor of why that is not about the collection or the building or the history, it's about individual leaders again. And it's why it is so important that we have had that 15 good years, and we have generated so many good people in the sector who are doing great stuff at the moment. And it comes back to one of the great strengths of this sector, I believe. The one part of the sector which also continues to be in incredibly rude health, of course, are the London Nationals, or the Nationals in general. And they, more than anyone, have benefited from those good years. And I think there is a huge amount to be learned from how they went about using government money to build their resilience, to build their brands, to build their partnerships, to find themselves now in incredibly strong positions. And what we're doing at Arts Council is working as closely as we can with those national museums on individual projects, and collectively with the National Museum Directors Council in advocacy and campaigning to make sure the strength and the capacities and capabilities that are in those national museums can be used wherever possible for the benefit of the whole sector. So let me move on now and talk specifically about university museums. And the first thing is, obviously, I recognise, just as we have an incredibly varied sector out there with local authority museums and independent museums and regimental museums and the National Trust and English Heritage, and it is incredibly different. I recognise that even within university museums, you are a very varied sector, ranging from organisations like this to, in some cases, very small collections embedded within university departments. So it is difficult to make simple statements that cover the whole sector. As I said earlier, I have the luxury, if you like, of not needing to worry about you specifically, but to think about, well, where do you sit within the wider museum sector in England? And there are kind of obvious places. In many places, you're performing a geographic role. You are dots on a map that help provide a distribution of museums across the country. And sometimes somewhere like Manchester, university, and indeed here in Cambridge, university museums in fact form the core local infrastructure. In other places, they're supplementing. Somewhere like Bath, they're supplementing other types of museums. In a similar way, you also contribute to the collections map of the country. If we can still talk about a distributed national collection, as Nick has said earlier, and I mentioned, universities box way above their weight in terms of the collections they offer to the national collection, and as we said, vastly higher percentage of designated collections than you would expect. You also contribute to the expertise map, where, as a sector, we go for specialists, and this is, of course, exactly as it should be. You make a major contribution to research projects across the sector and to things like subject specialist networks, as I've mentioned. But I'm also very interested in how you contribute in slightly less tangible ways, and going back to that idea, that goal one we have about excellence and how university museums contribute to excellence. And that kind of begs the question, should there be an intrinsic difference between university museums and other kinds of museums? It would be an interesting question to ask you. Should a visitor, should a member of the public visiting a museum be immediately aware of such a difference? Should a university museum feel or look different to a local authority museum or an independent museum? And if so, what should that difference be? I think the answer is probably yes, but again, I'd be interested in your view. And I guess the real interesting is, well, how should they feel different? I feel I should also say at this point that reminder that I also fully recognise that you have many different, or potentially many different masters, and university museums often find themselves in a quite tricky situation where they're having to make happy a series of different masters. We've heard from Hedley this morning. There is the wider academic community, there is us, there is the Arts Council, there are the other research bodies such as Wellcome and many, many others, and in some cases there are local authorities that value university museums, and of course there are the visitors. So in thinking about what I would want of you, and thinking about what you would want of yourselves, and how people might deal with you, I recognise this point that you have to, in some cases, keep lots of different masters happy. At least from everything I've heard in the last couple of years, I feel relatively reassured that there is enough of an alignment to go forward. So thinking about excellence and thinking about how I think university museums might make a particular contribution, there's four things I want to talk about in kind of ascending order of importance. I want to briefly talk about placemaking. I then want to talk very briefly about internationalism. Then I want to talk a little bit about risk. And then finally, the very particular thing, which is, for me, the USP of museums, university museums, which is the university bit, what universities bring. So very briefly, I think the placemaking is important. And that came home to me very recently when I was in, of all places, Southend. You know, Southend, you thought that the last place that would firstly take culture seriously, but also see universities as important. But within Southend right now, the council are thinking an awful lot about what will make Southend somewhere that people want to live in and want to value. And for them, culture is very important to that, and the arts are very important to it, and the university is. And it reminded me that as I go around the country and talk to local authorities, and as I go to different places, universities, and this has been talked about already today, are more and more becoming a key reason that that place has for existing, and a key reason why the councils think that that is somewhere that they can build on in terms of making that place attractive. So, although we might talk more about that essence that is about universities, I would urge you not to turn your back on that wider local authority perspective and the incredibly important part you play for local authorities in placemaking. Let me also briefly mention internationalism. One of the great strengths of universities is that you are international. You know, you work internationally, you have international students, almost all of you in terms of your research. It is still a global international business. And that is felt in terms of what you bring to museological debates of all kinds, and I think it is something very special you can bring. And it reminds me, Nick and Sally and others in the room were involved when 6 or 7 years ago we were involved in the human remains debate and the debate about repatriation. I was very conscious that it was colleagues from universities that were bringing the most nuanced views to that discussion, and they were doing it because they were in first-hand contact with people in other parts of the world. So they could act as a shorthand way of bringing straight to the table in England the views of Aboriginal communities because they were working with them, or the views of other people around the world. So again, I would ask you to continue to embrace that internationalism and continue to bring that to the table. The third thing then is risk. And Nick mentioned this very briefly in the last session. Risk is something that's talked a lot about in museums, and that we should be more risky and we should take more risks. And I think often we're not quite sure what we mean when we say that. I think, you know, the very last thing I would suggest anyone does is take risks with the financial stability of an organisation or with the collections. And we have seen occasionally where that goes horribly wrong. But within the arts world and within the Arts Council world, risk is thought of in slightly different ways, and is often thought of in terms of artistic risk. And it is embraced, and it is absolutely embraced, that artists should be free to take risks. And that's partly because that is just their right as artists, but far more importantly, it is recognised that it is something that will strengthen the whole sector and will provide for the future of the sector. That it is okay to accept that some artists will produce pieces of work that do not find audiences, or that audiences find too controversial, or that audiences just don't get. That's okay, because sometimes you will do that and it will trigger something brilliant that leads to moves forward in the artistic practice. And to give you two very trite examples, both Warhorse and Les Miserables started as what were considered very risky productions by the National Theatre. They thought, what on earth are you doing? You know, a play that's half in German and half in English with puppets about the First World War, and, you know, it's now a global phenomenon, making a vast amount of money for the National Theatre. So I do wonder what that looks like in terms of museum practice. And I would actually say, I think some of you are already doing it. I think, you know, I don't know if you would agree, Nick, but some of the stuff that Nick has done at the Manchester Museum with experimenting with interpretation, you know, is just trying new approaches to museum practice that might fail, or might actually, we might all look back on in 10 years and say, well, we're now all doing that because it was first done, you know, 10 years ago. I think the other place that does it well is the Wellcome Trust in London with some of their public programs. You think, my God, an exhibition of dead photographs of dead people, and, you know, and what has happened again and again with the Wellcome is that the more difficult it seems to be, the more challenging it seems to be, the more people embrace it and the more people go there. So I would ask you, as university museums, to think hard about that question of risk, and, you know, Nick said as much before lunch, and see where it can take us. And then the final area is this thing about the university, if you like, the university USP, which is this thing about universities, the thing about universities in university museums. So at its very simplest, you guys have access to an incredibly wide range of incredibly clever people doing very, very clever things. And, you know, as we've all already said, these clever people are also networked into lots of other clever people and international clever people. So university museums become liminal spaces. They become spaces where you can bring into contact normal people, to use a term, and all those clever people. And it strikes me that's what you should absolutely be embracing. You should be embracing ways in which you can harness those big, complicated ideas and share them with wider audiences. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 second you just wheel in researchers and say, oh, talk to these people, tell them the big ideas you have. That's actually the thing that makes it even more exciting and makes it incredibly exciting for you guys, the people in this room. Because what you are, of course, you are the interpreters, you are the arbiters, you are the translators. And what we need you to do, and this is, of course, the most fascinating thing about museums altogether, is to take incredibly complicated, big ideas and turn them into something that will have a resonance with other people. I won't use the word normal people again, but, you know, wider audiences. And I think not only is that something that absolutely you should be doing, but as I said, I think it's an incredibly exciting thing to do. And, you know, at a very personal level, I'm quite a bright lad, but there's quite a lot going on in the world at the moment that I just don't understand at all. And there is nothing better than having someone who really does understand those complicated ideas, put them across to me in a way that not only do I understand, oh, I now get it, and it's relevant. So I really do think that that's somewhere we should be going. And I guess what that also leads to is this thing of going back to the ecology of museums and the fact that museums are so very different. And there is that slight worry that actually we spent too much time all kind of trying to do the same thing and trying to be something for everyone. I think it's absolutely okay, because of this incredible diversity we have in museums, that we don't all have to be trying to appeal to absolutely everyone. I think that's okay. I think it's okay that some of our museums, can try and be clever and try and interpret things in slightly different ways. And I think you guys, the University Museums, are the absolutely best placed people to do that. I also think it's really interesting, and again, I think that this was touched upon before lunch, it's not just the big, complicated ideas in terms of history or science or art, but it's also the fact that you have access to research into people and how they think, and you have access into methods of communication. So what we should also be doing, and you are doing a lot of this, it's that about using this research not just for its own sake, but to help us interpret things. And it's why it makes, again, you guys, the university museum people, so important, because you should be the alchemists in all this, drawing in all of this wonderful research and using it in the right ways to inspire people. I think that's most of what I want to say. I would also say, on the whole, I think you're doing all this stuff. So this isn't me saying you really should be more risky, you really should be more international. You are doing all this stuff. If I was to identify one area where I think not only university museums but actually the whole museum community, and indeed most of society, is not quite doing the best it could do, it's around science, not natural science, but kind of that hard, difficult science. And I can't quite get why that is. And I think it's a kind of indictment on all of us that young people on the whole are getting complicated science at the moment through the Big Bang Theory on television, not through, really brilliant exhibitions or really brilliant books or really brilliant interpretations. So if I was to give one challenge to you, and if you want to come back and say, no, I think we are, it's that thing about complicated science, which is now so complicated but so important that we haven't quite got that. But on the whole, I think you are doing it, and I think there are brilliant examples all around us. This museum is superb. Every time I come back, it is superb. It has made us think again, I think, about material culture across the old world and civilization across the old world. I think the work Nick's just done in Manchester is brilliant in thinking again about archaeology in museums. I think the stuff UCL is doing through the Bright Clubs and museum show-off and things like that are brilliant in terms of getting to new audience. I could go on listing them. The Han exhibition at the Fitzwilliam was superb. You are doing brilliant stuff. You have got great leaders. As has been said, it may not look brilliant in terms of funding and resilience, but compared with some of the scary stuff going on out there, you're in a relatively good position. So make the most of that. And you are, from the Arts Council point of view, an absolutely key and fundamental part of that ecology. You are very, very important to us. Continue to be so. Thank you.